The crowd was screaming. Thousands of hands were raised, reaching for him, calling his name in unison. The lights flashed in perfect rhythm with the music as Michael Jackson moved toward the edge of the stage, lost in the moment, lost in the energy he had created. Then it happened. In a split second, Michael lost his footing. The stage edge disappeared beneath him, and suddenly he was no longer standing above the audience. He was falling into it. The music cut out. A collective gasp rippled through the arena as Michael Jackson's body vanished into a sea of hands. For a brief, terrifying moment, no one could see him. Not the band, not the dancers, not the security team, not even the fans closest to the stage. Inside the crowd, Michael felt panic surge through him. Not fear of injury, not fear of death, but something much deeper. As hands grabbed at his clothes, his arms, his legs, some tried to protect him, others simply reaching. Michael's heart began to race. His breathing became shallow. His mind flashed back to moments from his childhood when control had been taken from him, when he felt trapped, powerless, overwhelmed. This was a mistake, he thought. I shouldn't have come this close. Security rushed forward, shouting orders, forcing their way through the crowd. Fans screamed, some crying, some praying, some trying desperately to help hold him up. The arena was no longer a place of celebration. It had become silent chaos. When Michael was finally pulled back onto the stage, his face was pale. His eyes were wide. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled beneath him. The audience cheered in relief, believing the danger had passed. But they were wrong. Because what truly terrified Michael Jackson wasn't the fall. It was what had awakened inside him. What did Michael feel while trapped in the crowd? Why did he later say that moment haunted him more than any physical injury? And how did this incident quietly change the way he performed for the rest of his career? Stay with the story, because this wasn't just an accident on stage. It was a moment that forced Michael Jackson to confront his deepest fears in front of the entire world. The night had been flawless, at least on the surface. The arena was packed, every seat filled, every aisle vibrating with anticipation. Thousands of fans stood shoulder to shoulder, sweat and excitement hanging heavy in the air. Light swept across the crowd in waves of white and gold as the opening notes of the song echoed through the massive space. When Michael Jackson stepped forward into the spotlight, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The roar was deafening. Michael felt it surge through him like electricity. This was the feeling he had chased his entire life. The connection, the shared breath between performer and audience, the moment when music erased everything else. He moved effortlessly, each step precise, each gesture controlled. The choreography was muscle memory now, burned into his body after decades on stage. But there was something different about this night. Michael had been exhausted before the show even began. Rehearsals had been long and demanding, his body aching in ways he tried to ignore. He told himself what he always told himself. Once I'm on stage, I'll be fine. The adrenaline would carry him. The crowd would carry him. And for a while, it did. As the song reached its climax, Michael walked closer to the edge of the stage. He loved this moment. The fans reaching out, their faces lit with awe and devotion. He often said that this was where he felt most alive, closest to the people who understood him through music, even when words failed. Security tensed behind him, always uneasy when he approached the edge. Michael waved them off subtly. He wanted this closeness. He needed it. The crowd screamed louder, hands stretching upward like a living tide. Michael leaned forward, smiling, extending his arm in return. That was when his foot slipped. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a small misstep, a fraction of a second where balance vanished. But momentum had already taken over. Michael felt his center of gravity tilt forward, felt the stage edge disappear beneath him. Time slowed. The lights blurred. The sound of the crowd warped into something distant and distorted. Michael's stomach dropped as his body tipped forward, helpless against gravity. Then he fell. The world erupted. Screams replaced cheers as Michael's body plunged into front rows. Fans instinctively reached out. Some tried to support him, others frozen in shock. He felt hands collide with him from every direction, gripping his jacket, his arms, his shoulders. The music stopped abruptly. For a terrifying moment, Michael vanished beneath the crowd. Inside that sea of bodies, panic surged through him like ice water. He couldn't see the stage. He couldn't see the lights. All he felt were hands. Too many hands, pulling, pushing, pressing. He couldn't breathe, not because of physical pressure, but because his chest tightened with something far more familiar and far more terrifying. Fear, not the fear of injury, not even the fear of death. It was the fear of losing control. Michael's mind flashed backward, decades backward, to moments he tried desperately to forget. Rehearsal rooms where he felt trapped, a child's voice begging to stop, the feeling of being surrounded, powerless, unheard. His heart pounded violently in his chest. Get me out! Get me out! Get me out! Security forces finally broke through, shouting commands, forcing space around him. Strong arms wrapped around Michael, lifting him upward. Fans cried openly, some apologizing, others praying out loud as he was pulled free from the crowd. When Michael was placed back on the stage, the cheers returned, but they sounded wrong to him now. Muffled, distant, like they were coming from another world. He stood there, bent slightly forward, hands on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. His legs trembled uncontrollably. Sweat poured down his face, though he no longer felt the heat of the lights. A dancer moved closer, whispering, "Are you okay?" Michael nodded instinctively, even though he wasn't sure it was true. The audience thought the danger was over. They believed it had been a dramatic but harmless moment. Another story to tell, another legend to add to the myth of Michael Jackson. But inside Michael, something had cracked. As the band prepared to resume, Michael straightened slowly. He raised his head, forcing a smile, waving gently to reassure the crowd. The professional instinct took over. The show must go on. It always did. But behind his eyes, fear still lingered. Every time the crowd screamed, his chest tightened. Every time hands reached up again, his muscles stiffened. He finished the performance flawlessly. No missteps, no visible mistakes. Yet something had changed. Backstage, once the curtain fell, Michael retreated immediately. He didn't celebrate. He didn't speak. He sat alone in a quiet room, staring at his hands as they continued to shake. A doctor examined him, checking for injuries. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "No serious harm." Michael nodded, barely listening, because the harm he felt wasn't something anyone could see. That night, long after the arena emptied and the lights were shut down, Michael lay awake replaying the fall over and over in his mind. Not the physical sensation, but the fear, the helplessness, the way his body had reacted before his mind could stop it. He realized something that terrified him more than the fall itself. The stage, his sanctuary, had betrayed him. And worse, the crowd, the people he loved most, had accidentally become a thing that frightened him. From that night on, Michael Jackson would never approach the edge of the stage the same way again. And the memory of falling into a crowd would follow him far beyond that concert, into his dreams, his performances, and the silent spaces where fear lived, waiting to resurface. The fall lasted only seconds. Its impact would last a lifetime. The applause followed Michael Jackson off the stage, loud and relentless, but no longer reaching the way it once had. Behind the curtain, the world felt smaller, tighter. The air was cool, yet Michael's skin burned as if the stage lights were still pressed against him. Crew members spoke around him, voices overlapping, urgent, concerned, but their words blurred into a dull hum. Someone handed him a towel. Someone else offered water. Another voice asked if he wanted the show stopped entirely. Michael shook his head automatically. "No," he said softly. "I'm fine." It was a lie he had perfected over a lifetime. He moved slowly down the corridor toward his private dressing room, every step measured, controlled. His body obeyed him, but his mind lagged behind, still caught in the moment of the fall, the instant when the stage disappeared beneath his feet and the crowd swallowed him whole. When the door closed behind him, the silence was overwhelming. Michael sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. His fingers trembled again, more noticeably now that he wasn't performing. He stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Michael?" his tour manager asked gently. "The doctor wants to check you one more time." "Okay," Michael replied, though his voice barely carried. The doctor examined him carefully, his head, his arms, his ribs. No broken bones. No concussion. Just bruises beginning to form beneath the fabric of his clothes. "You were very lucky," the doctor repeated. "That could have gone much worse." Michael nodded. "I know." But luck had nothing to do with how he felt. When the doctor left, Michael remained seated, alone again. The noise of the arena still echoed faintly through the walls. Fans chanting his name, unwilling to leave, hoping for one more glimpse. Normally, that sound brought comfort. Tonight, it brought unease. Michael closed his eyes, and immediately the memory returned, not just of falling, but of being surrounded. Hands pulling, bodies pressing. The sensation of being trapped with nowhere to go. His breathing grew shallow. He opened his eyes quickly, standing up and pacing the room. He needed movement, control, something solid beneath his feet. "You're safe," he told himself. "You're not a child anymore. You're in control." But his body didn't believe him. A dancer entered quietly, hesitation written across his face. "Michael, people are worried out there." "I know," Michael said, forcing a smile. "Tell them I'm okay." The dancer hesitated. "You scared us." Michael's smile faltered. "I scare myself too," he admitted softly. When the dancer left, Michael walked toward the mirror. He barely recognized a man staring back at him. Thin face, tired eyes, makeup slightly smudged. He touched his reflection lightly, grounding himself. "I'm still here," he whispered. Yet something inside him felt shaken loose. Later that night, back at the hotel, sleep refused to come. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he felt the sensation again, the sudden drop, the loss of balance, the helplessness. His heart would race, forcing his eyes open once more. At nearly 3 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep. He wrapped himself in a robe and sat by the window, looking out over the city lights. From this height, everything looked peaceful, controlled, distant, not like the chaos below the stage. His mind drifted to earlier years. Concerts where fans fainted just from seeing him, crowds surging forward, security struggling to hold him back. He had always believed love couldn't hurt him, that the devotion of his fans was pure, safe. Tonight challenged that belief, not because the fans meant harm, but because love, when uncontrolled, could overwhelm. Michael pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "I didn't mean to scare anyone," he murmured, though no one was there to hear it. The next morning, the incident was everywhere. News headlines called it dramatic, shocking, terrifying. Some praised the fans for catching him. Others criticized the security. Videos circulated endlessly, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Michael couldn't bring himself to watch them. At rehearsal later that day, everything felt different. The stage looked wider. The edge seemed sharper, more dangerous. When he instinctively moved toward the front, his body stopped itself. A sudden stiffness locked his muscles in place. "Michael," a choreographer called out. "Everything okay?" "Yes," he answered too quickly. "Just adjusting." But adjustment didn't come easily. He began positioning himself farther from the edge, subtly changing movements he'd performed thousands of times. No one questioned it. They assumed it was creative choice. Only Michael knew the truth. The fall had taken something from him. Not his talent, not his love for music, but his sense of safety. The stage, once a place of freedom, now carried an invisible threat. That night, alone again, Michael wrote in a small notebook he kept hidden in his bag. "I fell into the crowd today. They reached for me, but I felt lost. I loved them, but I was afraid. I don't know why that scares me more than the fall itself." He closed the notebook, setting it aside. Michael Jackson would continue to perform. He always did. The world would see perfection, grace, control. But inside, a quiet question had taken root. What happens when the place you feel safest becomes a place you fear most? The answer wouldn't come quickly. And the true impact of that night, the moment he fell into the crowd, was only beginning to reveal itself. The next concert took place 3 nights later, in another city, Another packed arena filled with anticipation and screaming voices. From the outside, nothing seemed different. The lights were brighter, the stage immaculate, the crowd electric. But for Michael Jackson, everything had changed. Backstage, he stood quietly while his wardrobe was adjusted, his earpiece tested, his gloves placed carefully into his hands. People moved around him with practiced efficiency. Yet there was a new tension in the air, one no one openly acknowledged. They were watching him more closely now. Michael rolled his shoulders slowly, breathing in, breathing out. He had performed through pain before, through illness, through exhaustion. This wasn't new. And yet, the memory of falling lingered like a shadow just behind his thoughts. "You ready?" a stage manager asked. Michael smiled gently. "Always." The lights went down. The roar of the crowd surged like a wave crashing against the walls. Michael stepped onto the stage, and instinct took over. Music filled him. Movement followed sound. For a while, he forgot. He danced. He sang. He became what the world expected him to be. But as the show progressed and the moment approached where he traditionally walked toward the very edge of the stage, where fans reached out, crying, begging, stretching their arms toward him, his steps slowed. His heart began to pound. The edge was closer than it had ever seemed. Michael stopped a few feet short. The crowd reacted instantly. Confusion rippled through the front rows. Fans leaned forward, calling his name, thinking he hadn't noticed them. Then, from somewhere near the center, a single voice cut through the noise. "Michael, it's okay. You don't have to come closer." The words were soft, almost lost in chaos. But Michael heard them. He turned his head slightly, scanning the faces. And then he saw her. She couldn't have been older than her early 20s. She stood still while everyone else pushed forward, her hands not reaching but folded tightly against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but there was no hysteria in her expression, only concern. She wasn't asking for anything. She was protecting him. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. The music softened, the moment stretching unexpectedly. Security glanced at one another, unsure what was happening. The crowd grew quieter, sensing something different unfolding. The young woman spoke again, louder this time. "We love you," she said, her voice shaking. "Please don't get hurt for us." The arena fell into a stunned silence. Michael stepped back, placing a hand over his heart. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. He simply looked at her, at the sincerity in her eyes, at the way she stood firm against the surge of bodies around her. Then he nodded. Slowly, deliberately, he bowed his head toward her, not as a performer acknowledging a fan, but as a man acknowledging another human being. The crowd erupted, not in screams this time, but in applause, deep, rolling, emotional. Michael straightened, turning back toward the center of the stage. He finished the song differently that night, changing his movements, grounding himself. The show continued, but something fundamental had shifted. Backstage afterward, Michael sat quietly, still processing the moment. "Did you hear what she said?" one of the dancers asked. "That fan?" "Yes," Michael replied softly. "I heard her." Security later identified the young woman. Her name was Anna. She had traveled hours to see him perform, saving for months to afford the ticket. When asked why she spoke up when no one else did, her answer was simple. "I saw how scared he looked when he fell," she said, "and I realized we were asking too much of him." When Michael heard this, he closed his eyes. For the first time since the fall, tears came freely. That night, alone in his hotel room, Michael sat at the small desk by the window, the city lights glowing beyond the glass. He opened his notebook again. Tonight, he wrote, "Someone saw me, not the legend, not the performer. Just me." He paused, pen hovering. "I always believed love meant giving everything, even when it hurt. But maybe love can also mean knowing when to stop." He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but strangely calm. The fan hadn't saved him physically. That had happened the night he fell. But she had saved something else. His permission to be human. The following shows reflected that change. Michael adjusted choreography permanently, keeping a safer distance from the edge. Security protocols were strengthened. Announcements were made asking fans to remain calm. Some criticized him, claiming he had grown distant. They were wrong. He hadn't grown distant. He had grown wiser. At one concert, Michael addressed the audience directly. "I love you," he said, voice gentle but steady. "But I need you to help me stay safe so I can keep coming back to you." The crowd responded not with disappointment, but understanding. Michael realized something profound in that moment. The relationship between him and his fans didn't have to be built on sacrifice alone. It could be built on care. Anna never met Michael in person. There was no dramatic backstage reunion, no public acknowledgement with cameras flashing. But she received a handwritten note delivered to the fan club weeks later. It read, "Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't have to hurt. I heard you when I needed it most." She kept that note for the rest of her life. And Michael carried that moment with him, too. The fall on stage had exposed his vulnerability to the world. But the voice of one fan, calm, brave, compassionate, had given him something he didn't know he needed. Permission to step back. Permission to live. And in a life defined by noise, expectations, and endless demands, that single, quiet act of love became one of the most powerful moments Michael Jackson ever experienced. The night after the concert, Michael Jackson didn't sleep. He lay awake in the dark hotel room, the city humming faintly below his window, replaying everything over and over. The fall, the hands grabbing him, the sudden loss of control, the silence that followed, and then the voice. That single voice that had cut through thousands. "Please, don't get hurt for us." Michael turned onto his side, staring at the faint glow of the digital clock. 3:47 a.m. For most of his life, fear had been something he learned to hide. As a child, fear meant weakness. Fear meant punishment. Fear meant you hadn't practiced enough, hadn't been perfect enough. So he learned early how to swallow it, how to smile through it, how to perform over it. But this fear was different. This wasn't stage fright. This wasn't pressure before a show. This was the fear of losing control again. The fall had taken only seconds, but it had shattered an illusion Michael had carefully maintained for decades. The illusion that he was always in command of his body, his space. The moment. On stage, he had always been precise, intentional, untouchable. Until he wasn't. The next morning, Michael sat with his longtime physical therapist in a quiet corner of the hotel. The therapist moved his arm gently, checking range of motion. "Any dizziness?" she asked. "No," Michael said. Then, after a pause, "Not today?" She studied him carefully. "But—" Michael hesitated. Then he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "When I close my eyes, I feel like I'm falling again." She nodded slowly. "That's not uncommon after a traumatic incident." "I've fallen before," Michael said quickly. "On stage, off stage. I've been hurt. This is different." "How?" Michael searched for the words. "This time, I didn't choose a moment. It happened to me." The therapist leaned back slightly. That loss of control can be frightening, especially for someone who lives in such a public space. Michael let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." For the first time, he admitted something he had never said out loud. Not to doctors, not to staff, not even to himself. "I'm afraid it will happen again. And next time, I won't get back up." The words hung in the air. The therapist didn't rush to reassure him. She didn't dismiss the fear. She let it exist. "That fear doesn't mean you're weak," she said gently. "It means your body and mind are asking for care." Care. Michael thought about that word for a long time after she left. Later that day, he asked for a private meeting with his core team. No executives, no promoters, no press. Just the people who worked closest to him. When everyone was seated, Michael stood quietly at the head of the room. "I need to talk about something," he said, "and I need you to listen without interrupting." The room stilled. "I fell because I was tired," he continued, "because I pushed myself past what my body could give in that moment, and because I didn't want to disappoint anyone." No one spoke. "I've spent my whole life believing that my job is to give everything, even when it costs me, especially when it costs me." His voice trembled slightly. But I'm realizing something. If I keep doing that, one day there won't be anything left to give. Some of his team looked down. Others shifted uncomfortably. I'm scared, Michael said simply. Not of performing. Not of crowds. I'm scared of collapsing again, of not getting back up. And I don't want fear to be the thing that ends my career or my life. There it was. The truth. No drama. No theatrics. Just honesty. One of the dancers spoke quietly. What do you need, Michael? Michael considered the question. I need boundaries, he said. I need rest. I need us to stop pretending I'm invincible. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. Schedules were adjusted. Performance pacing was reworked. Moments that placed him physically at risk were redesigned. For the first time, Michael felt like the people around him were protecting him. Not the image, not the tour, not the machine. That night, he walked alone on the balcony of his hotel room, the cool air grounding him. He thought about the fan again, the way she hadn't demanded more, hadn't reached for him, hadn't tried to take anything. She had given something instead. Understanding. Michael realized that what frightened him most wasn't falling in front of thousands. It was the idea that no one would care if he did. And yet, that night on stage had proven the opposite. Someone had seen his fear, and instead of exploiting it, she had honored it. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future. Not one defined by constant sacrifice, but by balance. Not one where he disappeared into the role, but one where he survived it. He whispered into the night, as if the city could hear him. I'm still here. And for the first time since the fall, he believed it. The fear didn't vanish. It never does. But it softened, transforming into something else. Awareness, caution, self-respect. Michael Jackson would still dance, still sing, still give the world magic. But from that moment on, he carried a quiet promise with him every time he stepped onto a stage. I will not destroy myself to prove my worth. And that promise, born from fear, honesty, and the compassion of a single fan, changed the rest of the journey in ways no one could see. But Michael would never forget. The city changed after that night. Not in ways anyone could point on a map, but in the way people spoke, the way they waited, the way they watched Michael Jackson step onto a stage afterward. There was a new quiet beneath the applause, an awareness that something fragile lived inside the magic. Michael felt it immediately. At the next concert, as the lights dimmed and the familiar roar rose from the crowd, he paused behind the curtain longer than usual. He closed his eyes, placed one hand over his chest, and listened not to the audience, but to his own breathing. Slow, steady, real. When he stepped into the spotlight, the crowd erupted. But Michael didn't rush. He didn't launch himself forward with the explosive force people expected. Instead, he walked, calm, grounded, and the crowd followed his pace. After the show, back in his dressing room, Michael sat quietly while assistants buzzed around him. Someone handed him a stack of items that had been collected from the stage and security area. Flowers, signs, drawings, and letters fans had managed to leave behind. Usually, these things were sorted by staff later. Usually, Michael was too exhausted to look. But this time, something made him reach out. Leave these, he said softly. Please. When the room emptied, Michael sat alone under the warm glow of a single lamp. He began to go through the piles slowly, carefully, as if each item required respect. Then he saw it, a simple white envelope. No glitter, no perfume, no dramatic handwriting. Just his name, Michael Jackson. He turned it over. There was no return address. Only a small note written on the back flap, from someone who was there. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Michael unfolded it and began to read. Dear Michael, I didn't plan to write to you. I didn't think I needed to. But after what happened, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Not as a legend, but as a person who fell and got back up. When you fell into the crowd, everyone around me screamed. Some people cried. Some tried to reach for you. I froze. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. I saw fear in your eyes. Real fear. And I realized something in that moment. You spent your life holding us up, and no one ever asked who holds you. I said what I said because I needed you to know you don't owe us your body, your pain, or your life. Your music already gave us more than enough. Please don't disappear trying to give us everything. Stay. A fan who wants you alive more than legendary. Michael couldn't move. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He pressed the paper to his chest, as if it might slip away. For years, he had received letters filled with praise, devotion, desperation, and demands. Letters asking him to save lives, fix pain, heal hearts, be everything. This letter asked him to be something else. Present, alive, human. Michael sat there for a long time, the sound of the venue fading into the background. He felt something unfamiliar, but deeply needed settle into his chest. Not pressure, not expectation. Permission. That night, Michael placed a letter carefully into his bag. He didn't give it to staff. He didn't lock it away. He kept it close. In the days that followed, something subtle but profound changed. During rehearsals, Michael spoke up when he needed breaks. When pain flared, he acknowledged it instead of hiding it. When anxiety rose, he breathed through it instead of pushing past it. People noticed. Some worried it meant he was losing his edge. Others understood it meant he was reclaiming himself. One afternoon, Michael sat with his vocal coach after rehearsal and said something unexpected. "I don't want to sing like I'm immortal anymore." The coach looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I want my voice to sound like someone who knows time is precious," Michael replied. "Like someone who doesn't want to waste it." That night's performance was different, not weaker, stronger. His movements were more deliberate. His voice carried a rawness that cut deeper than perfection ever had. The crowd felt it, felt something honest moving through the music. Backstage, after the final note faded and the applause thundered, Michael stood alone for a moment, hand pressed to the wall, breathing hard but steady. He hadn't fallen. He hadn't pushed himself beyond the edge. He had finished the show as himself, not a myth, not a sacrifice. A man. Later, in his hotel room, Michael took the letter out again. He read it slowly, as if committing every word to memory. Then he did something he had never done before. He wrote back, not knowing the letter would ever reach its sender, not knowing where to send it, but needing to respond all the same. "Dear friend, I don't know your name, but I know your voice. I heard it when I needed it most. You reminded me of something I forgot, that I am allowed to rest, allowed to be afraid, allowed to be human. I don't know how to thank you for seeing me instead of the image. I promise I will try to stay. With love, Michael." He folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the original, slipping both into an envelope he carried with him everywhere from that point on. The world would never know about that exchange. There would be no headlines, no interviews, no documentaries about it. But for Michael Jackson, it marked a quiet turning point. Because sometimes it only takes one voice, soft, sincere, and human, to remind even the brightest star that it deserves to keep shining without burning itself out. And that night, as Michael finally slept peacefully, the fear that once consumed him loosened its grip, not because the danger was gone, but because he was no longer facing it alone. The night after the final show of that tour, Michael Jackson stood alone on the empty stage. The arena was dark now. The seats that had been filled with thousands of voices were silent, the air still carrying a faint echo of music and emotion. Crew members moved quietly in the distance, dismantling lights, rolling cables, doing what they always did after the magic ended. But Michael stayed. He asked everyone to give him a few minutes. Just a few, standing at the center of the stage. He looked out at the darkness and imagined the faces that had been there only hours before. The joy, the tears, the fear when he fell, the collective breath the crowd held until he stood again. He closed his eyes. For most of his life, silence had terrified him. Silence meant loneliness. Silence meant abandonment. Silence meant no applause to reassure him that he was still wanted, still loved, still needed. But this silence felt different. This silence felt like space. Michael sat down slowly at the edge of the stage, his feet dangling where the crowd once pressed forward. He placed his hands on the wood beneath him and felt the solidness of it. The stage had always held him, but tonight he was holding himself. He thought about the fall. Not the physical fall, but the moment after, when fear took over, when the world stopped, when he realized how fragile everything truly was. He thought about the fan's voice. Please don't disappear trying to give us everything. That sentence stayed with him more than any applause ever had. For the first time, Michael allowed himself to ask a question he had avoided his entire life. What if I don't have to give everything to be loved? The question didn't come with an immediate answer, but it opened a door. In the weeks that followed, Michael made choices that surprised everyone around him. He canceled a handful of appearances, not dramatically, not with excuses, but honestly. I need rest, he said. I need time. Some people panicked. Schedules were rearranged. Contracts were renegotiated. The machine resisted, as it always did. But Michael didn't. He began spending mornings without music, without rehearsals, without demands. Sometimes he walked. Sometimes he sat in silence. Sometimes he wrote, not songs, but thoughts, fears, questions, things he had never allowed himself to feel long enough to name. One afternoon, while sitting at a piano, Michael played a melody he didn't recognize. It was slower than his usual compositions, softer, unfinished. He played it again, and again. Then he stopped and whispered to himself, "This one isn't for the world." He didn't record it. He didn't share it. He let it exist only in that moment. And that was new. For years, everything Michael touched became something he felt obligated to give away. This time, he kept something just for himself. People close to him noticed the change. He laughed more quietly. He listened more than he spoke. He no longer rushed to fill every moment with sound. One evening, while sitting with his children, Paris asked him, "Daddy, are you okay?" Michael looked at her, surprised by the question. "Yes," he said honestly. "I think I am." She smiled, as if she already knew. Later that night, Michael took out the letters, the one from the fan and the one he had written in return. He read them both slowly, then placed them back into the envelope. He didn't see them as reminders of fear anymore. He saw them as reminders of connection. Weeks turned into months. The story of the fall became part of mythology, told and retold by fans, media, and critics alike. Some exaggerated it. Some minimized it. Some forgot the fear entirely and remembered only the spectacle. But Michael remembered the truth. He remembered the moment when the world went silent, and he remembered choosing to listen instead of panic. One night, long after the tour ended, Michael stood in front of a mirror backstage at a small, private rehearsal space. He studied his reflection, not with judgment, but with curiosity. "I'm still here," he said softly. The reflection didn't argue. In that moment, Michael made a quiet promise to himself. Not a promise to perform harder. Not a promise to give more. Not a promise to be perfect. A promise to stay. To rest when he needed to speak when something hurt. To step back when the edge came too close. To remember that the music lived inside him and didn't require his sacrifice to survive. Years later, fans would talk about that tour as one of his most emotional. They would say his performances felt different, deeper, more human. They would say they felt closer to him than ever before. But none of them knew the full truth. That the most important moment didn't happen under the lights. Didn't happen during a song. Didn't happen in front of cameras. It happened in the silence after the fall. In the voice of one fan. In the choice of one man to listen. Michael Jackson didn't stop being a legend that night. But he remembered he was human first. And that choice, the quietest one he ever made, became the strongest act of his life.